صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. We mentioned that Islam is a religion for all times. And we mentioned that some people or some Muslims turn to God when everything is working out just fine, and others turn to God only during hardship. Now, we spoke about those that turn to God when there is ease. But let's look at those that turn to God when there is hardship. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, وَإِذَا مَسَّ الْإِنسَانَ الضُّرُّ دَعَانَا لجنبه أو قاعدا أو قائما فلما كشفنا عنه ضره مر كأن لم يدعنا إلى ضر مسه كذلك زين للمسرفين ما كانوا يعملون. Allah Azza wa Jal, He speaks about mankind in general. But in this verse, He is putting down mankind. It's not a verse where He's speaking of them in a positive manner. Like other verses where Allah Azza wa Jal says that He created mankind in the best form. In other verses where He says He taught mankind in order to understand things. However, He says here that mankind are only there with Allah when they are in a situation. So in other words, Allah Azza wa Jal is saying there are more unbelievers than believers, there are more stingy people than there are generous people, and there are more cowards than there are brave. There are more people with vices than there are people with virtues. Allah is even speaking here generally about the believers, that they are more likely to congregate in places of immorality rather than congregate in places of morality. You know, what happens when we don't congregate? Those that don't attend majalis, those that don't attend these congregations of morality, your soul, just as your eyes have vision, your soul has vision. Your eyes have basar, that they see with, and that's why when you're fasting, that you can't, sometimes you feel you can't be bothered working. You don't see things in the same manner. That's why you see some people, they twitch much quicker. They'll get into an argument quicker than when they're not fasting. Because nothing functions as good in your physical body when your physical body is not being fed. Likewise the soul. When the soul isn't being fed with morality, with exhortation, with reminders, the soul develops blurry vision. Then suddenly you're in a plane and there's extreme turbulence. Or you're at sea and there's a storm. It sets off an alarm. I was once flying and we were landing in Heathrow Airport in London. And when you go, especially into London, there is a lot of turbulence. It's unbelievable. The plane's like a paper plane in the sky. And I had just come back from the Hajj and Ziyat Imam Rida, so you feel like a bit like Superman at this point because you say, I'm doing all right, you know. I haven't gone back into my natural routine again. You still feel like you've got some kind of coat of armor. But you see people on the plane, they were petrified. And everyone was murmuring and muttering, it's like they were praying. At this point, when the fear kicks in, everyone turns to God. Everyone turns to God. During the Civil War, the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, they say, turned to God and he made a vow, a covenant with God. They say he got down on one knee and said to God, if you give me victory in the battle against the South, I will abolish slavery. They turned to God in this hardship. Even if you look at after the September 11th attacks, and all the American people started to turn towards religion. They were all praying, they were singing Amazing Grace, and they moved towards God because they felt a moment of fear. There was a threat there. Even if you look at people that claim that they don't believe in God at all, that when it comes to a moment where they have their back to the wall and a problem, they turn to God. Pharaoh is one extremely unbelievable example when we think of this. Because Pharaoh was the one that declared that he was God. Ana rabbukum al-a'la. He said, I am your God. That's what he said to the people. That don't I rule over greater Egypt? Don't the river flow from beneath me? I am God. That was his statement. However, when he was inflicted with the curses that were put upon him, the pestilence that took over the land from the dua of Nabi Musa ala nabina wa ali wa alayhi salam, Pharaoh turned towards God and said, Oh Allah, help me. Let me turn the water, because the water had turned to blood. He said, let me be able to turn the bloody water back to water. And then I will believe in you. For that moment he turned back. Because at the time of need, everyone knows that everything lies in the hands of God. I get a lot of brothers in the community, when it comes to time they've got to go to court. They say, could you please help me? Could you write a statement of good character? And then they start to, you see them in the mosque, they're reading dua, they start to really move towards religion. Especially when people go to jail. You have a look at jail. You wouldn't believe it. There's people that have never called me or called a sheikh or something like that at the time when they're outside. The second they get to jail, one guy called me once, he said, I need to pray. Is it okay if I pray wearing a specific item of clothing? And I think to myself, afterwards, I've known this guy, he doesn't pray. But suddenly once he's in jail, they all turn pious, they all turn righteous. Because it's a time where they need God. There's a time of trial. Someone gets sick, they turn to God. When someone dies, there's a death in the family, you see everyone start to turn to God. Because it's a time when there is a sign. But when everything's working out, how many people leave jail and become free men and don't return to jail? How many people do you know have got out of jail and did not return? Even the statistics, they're not less than 80%. 80% plus return to jail after leaving jail. Because they forget the favor that was poured upon them. They forget God's favor. Even when a person's in their strength, after being sick and weak, they forget the favors that they asked of God when they were in that weakness of health, when they were in the turbulence of the plane, when they were in that storm, when there was real fear for their lives. If you remember during the war that took place for the Lebanese people that had relations overseas during the July battle of 2006, where people were begging. I remember one story where a woman, she had a four-wheel drive, an X5, and she said to the one of the people that was in the village, she said, if you drive me to Beirut from the village, you can have the X5. I'll write it over in your name. I've got no interest in this worldly item because I just need to escape. Now these people that fled and feared and turned to God when everything calmed down, did they keep these vows? When the summer comes in, well, right now you're winter, everyone turns religious in winter. When summer comes in, do you cast religion out of the window? What happens when this happens? If you remain, the rest cast away. Allah Azza wa Jal, in this verse, has mentioned, and in other verses, He mentions, He says, فَإِذَا اطْمَأْنَنْتُمْ فَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Now here is a verse specifically for that once you are content and everything has been back to, everything's secure, everything's back to normal, God says then uphold the prayers. In other words, turn back, remember these vows, remember what you were upon, and remain with this. Don't turn back to the way you were. But the problem, he says, is that everyone, or the majority of people, always turn back to themselves and their old ways. They forget about being grateful, and they show ingratitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, when you show ingratitude, what's the biggest problem with showing ingratitude? Look at ingratitude when it comes to yourself. Don't look at it towards Allah Azza wa Jal. Look at it when it comes to yourself. How do you feel when someone that you know asks you for a favor, and you help them once, you help them twice, you help them 3 times, then when you want something in return, they're always busy. Or when they get what they want from you, they avoid you. This is called ingratitude. This is someone that doesn't give thanks. So this is what we call an ingrate. When someone does this to us, why don't we feel the same way? In a dua that we read at the, which is very soon, you read this dua in the Al-Hijjah, the end of the Al-Hijjah for the day of Mubahala. He says, Allahumma in kanat dhunubi qad akhlaqat wajhi andak. Now, here in this narration, in this dua, because the thing that causes us to become ingrates is the sins we commit, is the errors we make. This is what makes us lose reminder of God. So I need to find a doorway to get back with God. Now I need to turn to God through a doorway. Because before I read this, there's something very important for me to look at. Is that before I'm actually going to call that, I need to look at what is the muttaqi in the times of trial, and what is the muttaqi in the times of ease. You will find that the muttaqi during trial and during ease is in the same state. And this is what is a quality. How can I be a person that during trial and during comfort I'm in the same state? Sorry, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad first. When we read about those that only ask for God during problems and don't ask God during comfort, the narrations are clear as to the way that they are dealt with. Sometimes when you ask for something and it doesn't happen, the narration says, من صره أن يستجيب الله يستجيب الله له في الشدائد والكرب فليكثر الدعاء عند الرخاء. If you want Allah Azza wa Jal to answer your prayers during hardship and problems, you know when you have trials and afflictions, and sometimes you see you're not overcoming these trials. In order for Allah Azza wa Jal to help you overcome a problem, the narration says, increase your dua during ease and comfort. When everything's going good, ask God. Don't be of those when things are going good, where Allah Azza wa Jal says, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَنْ رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. That don't become rebellious when everything is working out. Even in ease and comfort, ask from Allah Azza wa Jal to give you. In another narration, it says, know God during ease and comfort, and then God will know you during trial and affliction. Another hadith on top of that says, إِذَا دَعَى الْعَبْدِ فِي الْبَلَاءِ. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali. That if a servant of God asks Allah Azza wa Jal during the stress and affliction, you know when you have a problem, sometimes you're not being answered. It says, if a servant of God, if a human being asks God at the time of distress and affliction, and does not ask God during ease and comfort, the angels will veil his voice. They'll cover his voice, because they will say, this is a stranger's voice. Why have we not heard this voice before? Why has this person not asked before? Why is it until something happens, he has called upon God? It's like this child that couldn't speak, and his parents were waiting for him to speak. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, he wouldn't speak. So his parents took him to a doctor. He just wouldn't talk. When he turned 5, they were seated, they were eating, and then he said to his parents, he said, more salt. And they were shocked. Took this kid 5 years, he hasn't opened his mouth, suddenly he's spoken. And they said, son, why haven't you spoken all this time? Suddenly you spoke. He said, well, up till now everything's been all right. This is the first problem I've encountered in the 5 years. So now I spoke. Allah Azza wa Jal wants you to speak and wants you to supplicate, even when everything is in ease, even when everything around you is working out. This is what it means in this part where the Imam speaks about the righteous and the pious. He says that they are in the same state, whether there is an affliction or whether everything else is working out. And that's why when we ask Allah Azza wa Jal, in even Dua Al-Ameli, which we read, for us to be pleased with whatever Allah Azza wa Jal does and whatever is set for us. And even in the ziyarah of Amin Allah that we read when we visit Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, we say, Allahumma faj'al nafsi mutma'innatan biqadarik, radiyatan biqada'ik. If I am at that state of mind where I am pleased with whatever takes place, regardless. Could you imagine when, doesn't mean that I don't weep when I'm sad, doesn't mean that I don't smile when I'm happy. What it means, I'm in that same state. My relationship with God has not changed. My relationship with my Creator has not changed. I'm still pleased with God. It's like once in a movie, this priest, he lost his faith. So his child said, Dad, you know, you were always at the church. What happened? The priest turns and looks at his child and says, son, it's not that I don't believe in God anymore. He said, but after he took your mother, I don't love him. This was his reply. That this person was the ones that I mentioned in the verse last night, the ones that worship God and they're on the verge. They're on an edge. When everything is working out, they are pleased with God. The second a calamity or an affliction or distress befalls them, they turn on their Creator. Something changes, they turn on their Creator. Whereas the muttaqi is in the same state. This is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying. For shiddah, as he is in, shiddah meaning hardship, as he is in the rakha, when everything is at ease, when everything is within comfort, that even the master of martyrs, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, when his infant was martyred, that he made a statement to show that this happening to me has become easy upon me because Allah Azza wa Jal is a witness over this. God has witnessed this. And God understands and sees my position. That's why they remain in that single state, because they have that same recognition at all time. They're wary of God's presence at all time. They expect to be tried. Who can dare say that I want to live in this world and not be tried? One man was heard by Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam saying that I seek refuge in God from trials. And then the Imam corrected him. Why? Because the Quran says that your children and your wealth is a trial. That even when you read on the 23rd night, Surah Al-Ankabut, the beginning of the surah speaks that you were created to be tried. If you are to state that I believe, you will be tried with your belief. So, to know that you are here to be tried. Not that when a trial or an affliction befalls me, I look up and I say, is there a God? Assalamu rahmatullah. But when a trial and an affliction befalls me, I'm content. Why? Because I know what I'm here for. I am in that same state. Yes, I may weep, but I'm at ease with myself because my relationship with God is a good relationship. Not that I'm on the verge of turning at any moment. And this is how they develop this, because they have wariness of where they are and where they are in this world and what they're here for, and that being a trial. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us success in this trial, especially in these final nights. We ask Allah to grant us all immunity from the fire of hell. وهذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.